The reading is Mark chapter 15, starting to read at verse 1. Jesus before Pilate. Very early in the morning, the chief priests, with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin, reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was the custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release you, the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spat on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was the third hour when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 robbers with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Christ, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him.
So at the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." One man ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and the younger, and of Joses and Salome. In Galilee these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. It was preparation day. That is the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Thank you. It's always good to share. Right, okay. I think I want to start by saying this is a difficult sermon today, because it's one of those sermons, when we journey into Good Friday, it's not always easy to hear what Jesus went through. But if we ignore it, then we ignore what is at the heart of the Christian faith. Before I talk about Mark's Gospel, I want to talk, first of all, about the PowerPoint, if you can come on, please. The title of this sermon is Love That Knows No Limit. And as Jesus now journeys to the cross, it is really about the love that knows no limit for every single human being. I'm going to begin with Colossians, a verse from Colossians, then I'm going to go back to Mark's Gospel. But the verse from Colossians is this. Colossians 1:15, the Son is the image of the invisible God. For in him all things were created. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Now, you know that I like highlighting certain texts. And the reason why I do that is because, if you've noticed, it's all about him. And sometimes we think of Jesus coming to the earth, God in human form, and we forget that Paul tells us, or was Paul's writing to the church in Colossus, that did you realize that in him, Jesus, all things were created? All things have been created through him and for him, and in him all things hold together. He was the one. If you've been on the Lent course, the planets, the universe, so the one I want to speak to you about today is that one. It's Jesus. The one who created. And sometimes I think we neglect to fully understand how big the universe is, how powerful this God is. And I want to speak to you today about the one who created those things. Sometimes we can think of the planets and the universe and it feels out there. But then Jesus came, God came in human form. He came to this little planet of ours to live on it. Why did he come? You see, through much of history, God had made covenants, he'd sent prophets, and he now decided to come himself, God in human form. And this life would lead him to the cross. Now, for you, this is just a piece of wood, isn't it? Yeah? Now, at one time, that was a tree. Yeah? It was a tree that was cut down. And you're probably thinking, Darren, where are you going with this? Well, do you know, when we often focus on the cross, Jesus himself was crucified on a cross. And you know that piece of wood that he was crucified upon? At one time would have been a tree. And that tree would have grown huge to be able to be cut down to the size that you would need for a cross. And I thought about this and I thought, you know, before Jesus came to earth, before God came to earth in human form, he'd have saw that tree planted. That tree would have been planted, and I'm sure would have produced buds or whatever it would, but he'd have saw that planted, and he would also have known that would be the tree that would be cut down. It would be made into a cross. And would that be that he would be crucified on? Have you ever thought of that? See, it just blew my mind because, see, the God who I'm speaking about today, this wonderful Jesus, is the one who's created the planets and the universe, the Milky Way, where it would take us 2,500 years to count the stars. But he's also the one who created this wonderful world in which we live in, the beauty. And of course, if we look at each of us, one of us are absolutely unique and precious in God's sight. He's created us. And we're going to explore the cross today because the next slide just reveals so much. He came himself and gave himself completely in love. It's a love that knows no limit. It's a love that knows no limit. It's a love which showed itself as he came himself and gave himself completely in love. And we're going to look at his journey now. And today, as we've read Mark's Gospel, we pick up the journey of Jesus, if you like, during what we would call Easter week. The one who named the stars is now there, here on earth. And he appears before Pilate. It's a love that knows no limits. And what happens? Let's look at the text. Humanity, you see, they put a purple robe on him. They twisted together a crown of thorns. Now, I don't know about you, but just cutting this from the garden today, and you know, when you get your fingers twisted in something and it just rips your, you know, and it just digs in, and then your first thing is to pull away, isn't it? And I know myself as I was making this today, just to touch it, there's a sharp thing which causes you to pull away. I once made a crown of thorns, or tried to just produce a crown of thorns, and somehow imagining what that would be like as they place the crown of thorns upon the one who created the universe. Just the blood which had flowed from his head alone. I mean, if we're honest, how many of us have been out in the garden and you've got a thorn bush and you've decided to try and tackle it without gloves? Come on, let's be honest. And you've come in at the end of the day and you've got all these cuts on your fingers, but each time the thorn touches the skin, what do? It makes you jump. Now, just imagine what it must have been like when the crown of thorns got put on his head. It was a love that knows no limits. It reminds me of the love that he has for me and he has for you. And they began to call out to him, "Hail the King of the Jews!" And again they struck him on the head with a staff and spat on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. You know, there was three things. They mocked him, they struck him, and they spat on him. Just imagine if somehow it's possible what this Jesus went through. And I know, I guess some of you are thinking at this point, Darren, let's not talk about this. We just want to come to church and we want to have a nice time, a nice bit of fellowship, and sing a few songs and meet some friends, and then we'll go home and maybe next Sunday come to church if the weather is good. Hopefully I won't have anything on next week. You know, but sometimes you see when we look at church like that, we we miss the meaning of why we come. We come because we've understood something about the love that knows no limits. Jesus. You know, we come to church because somehow we've connected with this story. This story about the lengths that he went to save me. And so, you know, I know that next week we will be celebrating. What will we be doing on Easter Sunday next week? The resurrection. And I know that we couldn't do this 52 weeks a year because it's heavy going. I know that. But we have to not forget the Easter story where that love knows no limit. And you know, I have got frustrated sometimes when we pay hard and fast with church, and you know, and some people can be more committed to Pilates than they can to weekly worship. And the reason why I smile, because you can chat to them and they say, "Oh, I'm at Slimming World every Wednesday night. I'm at Pilates every Thursday, or I'm at this every week." And then when we look at our commitment to Christ and our church attendance, it's sort of a fraction. And it's a love that knows no limit. What happens? He then has to journey half a mile. He's already been spat on and mocked. And guess what they did in verses 24 of Mark 15? And they crucified him. Have you noticed how the word "they" is so important? Because a few weeks ago, you know, I spoke about the importance of both Jew and Gentile. It was humanity. Sometimes we try and blame this or that. No, humanity. They crucified him. And I've paused for a question there. And so often what we can do when we read the scriptures, we can treat it like an historical account. It's because it's they that did that. But when I sat there preparing for it, I thought to myself, it wasn't they alone, as if it's something I'm included in the they. What about us? I just want to ask us a question. What is my part in this story that leads Jesus to the cross? We heard in the week, and so often, you know, when we talk about the sin word, we can look at that in so many different ways, can't we? I'm not so bad. I'm not as bad as Reg, or as Reg would say to me, I'm not as bad as Darren. You know, but do you see what I mean? It's so often we can like, oh, I'm not as bad as so and so. But actually, what we heard on Thursday night was sin doesn't just make us bad people. Sin brings death. And what this Jesus did on the cross, and if I'd want to jump up and down, is the fact that he went to the cross for me. It means he's brought me back from death to life. I was lost and now I'm found. That's what we heard when we heard the prodigal son. And although the cross is so, you know, that it's hard going when you're preaching on it, but it's a love that knows no limit. It's a love which brought me back from death to life. And that's what the cross does. That's the heart of Christianity. It speaks about forgiveness because Jesus went there in my place. He died for me. He brought me back from death to life. That's why I love going to church. You know why I love going to church? I should have said, you know why I love going to this church? But I love going to church. See, I'm just got to wake you up a little bit. Because I'm with like-minded people. Yeah? Those who have committed their lives to Christ have been brought back from death to life. Do you remember when we spoke about testimonies on Thursday night? So who's going to give the testimony now? Who has got a testimony if you was at the Lent group? Put your hands up if you've got a testimony. Carol, thank you. John, thank you. We have got a testimony. So often we say, oh, our story's not so good, is it? But if you heard the Thursday night DVD, it spoke about our testimony because this Jesus has brought us back from death to life. We have got an incredible testimony. Because actually without him, we know that our sin will lead to death, eternal separation. That's why the cross is at the centre of Christianity. And I'm not going to dwell on this just for too long, but I want to just for you to somehow, just for a moment, understand Bishop Stephen Cottrell. He's an Anglo-Catholic bishop. He wrote books like Catholic Evangelism. There's some fantastic books that he's written. He says the Romans were fond of crucifixion. They had mastered the technology of killing. This is how he speaks about the death of Jesus. And I'm just going to go through this as quick as possible, but I want you to just grab some of the words. They could decide how much it hurt and how long it lasted. You see, the clever bit was the nail through the feet. A body just suspended by the wrists will soon develop agonizing cramp. The ribs are drawn upward and the chest is fixed in position as if the victim has just drawn a large breath but cannot breathe out. But the nailing of the feet, the condemned man could buy time by pushing himself up on the nails to raise his body a few inches and relieve the tension in his chest and arms. Now, I didn't read that fast in the week. I read that quite slowly, actually. It's a love that knows no limit. It's a love that demands my life, my soul, my all. See, it's not just a piece of wood. It's not just an historical account. This is God in human form coming. Coming for the reason to save us, to bring us back from death to life. It's a love that knows no limits. When I read what the Romans did and how they had mastered this technology, boy, if you're ever in doubt whether this Jesus loves you, he does. Because it's a love that knows no limits. So, what is my part in this story that leads Jesus to the cross? And of course, it's my sin. I'm going to finish now by saying it's a love that knows no limit. He loves you with an everlasting love. And I look forward to seeing you either in the week or next Sunday, because death wasn't the end. He rose again. And that's what we're going to be celebrating on Easter Sunday. God bless you all, and